another sad day night.
But I can't help.
He's a rebel and you'll never be any good. She's a fool. Two girls for every boy. If you need someone to count on, come a little bit close to your mic. Got a distance.
Hi, Art Fein here, Art Fein's Poker Party, coming from Hollywood with a very special guest. First time in ever on our show, Mr. Hal Blaine. Hal, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Art. My pleasure.
We're very glad to have you here. Alongside us doing the talking and interviewing.
Oh, we're not going to be doing it. We're just going to be listening.
Paul Bodie, a well-known drummer also,
Oh, well. Yeah.
among a select circle.
Yeah.
And Skip Heller, a man of many talents. Among them, guitar virtuoso, producer, and cool guy from Philly.
Well,
welcome,
thank you.
Welcome, Skip. But we're here to talk to Hal Blaine. I've been looking forward many, many years. I've been anticipating and wishing to have this happen, and then Skip facilitated it by getting out of Hal for me, and here he is. Hal's drumming is on, what did you say? What would you say? Every record?
Yeah, every record ever recorded.
We are limited to every record produced in L.A. in the past 30 years, but that's not true.
But She's a Fool is a New York
He
record.
goes to New York, too, right?
I don't know what you're talking about.
That Leslie Gore record.
Why would that?
Leslie Gore?
Is that a New York record?
She's a Fool. Wasn't that a New York record?
Was that on the tape?
Yeah, that was on the
right
tape.
at the very end there.
Well, then it's something that I did with Quincy out here.
Oh, it was
So
out here.
Well,
Don't make a fool out of him.
Paul, why don't you sit here?
all right, well, Hal's drumming, I knew, drummers aren't generally credited on the records. You've heard him a million times. At the beginning, we played a bunch of stuff, Be My Baby, Count Me In, Jerry Lewis. I don't remember exactly.
Another Saturday night.
Another Saturday Night,
I
Sam
can't help
Cooke.
falling in love
Well,
with
that's
you.
you didn't hear any of the records of the year, any of the Academy Awards. You didn't hear any. It was a 4.5-minute piece.
Yeah, we'll hear some more in just a few minutes. We'll run some more stuff
Oh,
from,
you
that,
will?
from that compilation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, when it comes to drums that stand out in records, to me, and only to me, I guess, the two that stand out were both yours. One is the opener to Be My Baby. Boom, boom, boom.
That was
I
the
guess
one,
you could do it
yeah.
better than me. And the single drum beat at the open up to What Beach Boys.
Wouldn't it be nice?
Wouldn't it be nice for it to tinkle and it goes, bam! There's just this sound. It's
One big smack.
one big smack. Were there many takes on that one drum beat?
I don't think so. Although Brian used to like to do a lot of takes, I think because Phil Spector used to do a lot of takes. And Brian was kind of emanating Phil Spector in the beginning, until he took over on his own.
Well, speaking of the beginning, your whole life story, of course, is covered in your book, Hal Blaine and the Wrecking Crew. The Wrecking Crew being the name of the studio musicians that you hung around
Yes.
with primarily in the 60s and 70s.
All the guys.
Constituted one.
Right.
We have an 800 number you could call for information about this after the show. I know that in the very early years when you were, I guess, a teenager doing stuff with local small bands, you ended up in a band with Tommy Sands?
Yes, that was my first introduction to rock and roll, actually. Excuse me, it was actually rockabilly.
Yeah?
And through a series of events
It's here in L.A.?
here in L.A., I was working in Hollywood at the old Garden of Allah Hotel, and one of Tommy's managers came in. He was about to sign with
RCA?
Capitol Records. He had just done The Singing Idol, a big television show that Elvis was supposed to do, but Elvis went in the service. And so Elvis's manager, Colonel Tom, got Tommy Sands to do it. He had also been managing Tommy Sands, who was a brilliant singer and actor. Tommy was quite an unbelievable kid. And I really didn't want any part of rock and roll. And I went to the hotel, they paid me well he said, just do this audition. It was one of these guys, He said, just do this audition, we'll pay you good. And when they hear your band, we know you'll cut it, then Capitol will sign Tommy, and then the rest will be history. Then you can leave. You don't have to, play with them. Well, I met Tommy, and I started talking to him, and I met the guys. They were kids. They were probably 16, 17. I was probably 28 at the time. I was the old man of the group. Well, it turned out that Tommy Sand's father, Ben, was one of my piano teachers in Chicago. So it really kind of became a family type thing. It was just incredible. And of course, Tommy, to this day, I see him, I love him to death. He lives right here.
Does that mean you were on Teenage Crush? No.
Yeah, I think I did
Yeah?
do Teenage Crush, yeah.
Wow. Unbelievable.
That's a guy you ought to talk to one of these days. Tommy's a terrific guy.
He's been on once, actually.
Oh, he has
Yeah,
been? Oh.
we'll have him again now because he's really terrific.
All right.
So when you
Anyway, the rest was history. I started working with Tommy. We traveled all over the world doing concerts. He was like the major teenage idol. And it turned out that I was managing, road managing and conducting for him at times with the big orchestras and playing drums, of course. And we had just an incredible number of years. Of course, we were all at the Ambassador Hotel at the Coconut Grove when Tommy met Nancy Sinatra and they fell in love. You know, she was looking at her dad up on stage, you know, so he's 17-year-old, the new Frank Sinatra, sort of. Because he wasn't singing only rock and roll. We were doing some great arrangements, wonderful arrangements by some great arrangers. And they fell in love, got married. The rest was history. You know, they were together about 5 years, I guess.
What was your initial aversion to rock and roll?
Well, the thing was, Art, I was a jazz, bebop drummer, pop, you know, drummer. Rock and roll was kind of a dirty word, and I had no idea that I was going to fall into rock and roll. A lot of guys just refused to play what was called rock and roll, and it turned out that I started getting called Sam Cooke. Well, you heard a piece of it on there. Sam Cooke and H.B. Barnum and a bunch of people in town, just all of a sudden they said, get this rock drummer. Nobody knew what rock was. You know, rock was a new thing. And there were movie people, producers who wanted a little bit of rock and roll music in their movies. The commercials wanted to start using a little bit of rock and roll in their commercials. And all of a sudden, I mean, my phone never stopped ringing. I had to have a secretary. I had to have a guy that took care of my drums. He's been with me. This is his 33rd year taking care of my drums. And we're still doing it. And obviously, I was kind of forced into it, but I fell in love with it. You know, Phil Spector, all the Phil Spector stuff that came along, the Beach Boys from that, all the surf stuff from that, the Capitol stuff with Dick Dale, the surf punks, well, that was later, but all of the surf groups that came along.
Fantastic Baggies.
The Baggies, the Ventures, that no matter what shape your stomach is in.
T-Bones.
T-Bones.
T-Bones, the Marquettes, all of those groups,
They were you.
they were all me. You know? Wow. As a matter of fact, it was the drummer with the knack, Bruce Gary, that did a quote some years ago that's still out there and people still talk about it. He was on an interview one time and he said, my biggest disappointment was finding out that a dozen of my favorite drummers were Hal Blaine. And people still use that, and I still use it.
A couple things that flew by, and I want Skip to jump in whenever you want to. On Spectre Records, on this Christmas album, on it's Christmas Baby Please Come Home, that really has that crazy drum stuff going on at the end, right?
Yeah.
I mean, each take, did you improvise a new ending like that?
Well, it went on, yes. Well, that was part of my creativity, I guess. Phil was like no other producer. First of all, he used to hold me back. He would rehearse and rehearse and rehearse until everybody was almost falling over rehearsing. But he would, don't play, don't play. And I became like a racehorse trying to get out of the gate. And eventually we would start doing takes. And then he would say, now play. And then he used to, as I've said many times, he was in the booth and we could all see him, and he became like a Leopold Stokowski or an Elmer Bernstein, a Leonard Bernstein, conducting, looking at the horns and saying more or less or give me more. And then he would look at me and he'd say, now. And that's when I would, go absolutely bananas.
Well, you notice the fade out of every Phil Spector record is like a Hal Blaine drum solo with musical accompaniment.
And I always did, And the take was never over until I did the quarter note triplets. Ding, 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 da, 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 da,
Oh, yeah,
da.
yeah. I know that.
Then the record was over.
What about Good Vibrations? That thing was patched together, we know, from many, many different takes.
We did many sessions on that particular song.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we would work 5 minutes with Brian, and he'd say, "That's all." And sometimes we'd work for several hours while he was putting it together.
So you didn't kind of initially lay down a track that they went off of. He'd get a new idea, you'd come back and
Exactly.
do it a different way.
Exactly. I was Brian's contractor for the Beach Boys. And obviously I did all the paperwork for those guys, and I'm still doing it. We just did Brian's new record.
Oh, really?
It's called Everything I Need. It is a magnificent record that he did with his daughters, Wendy and Carney.
Wow.
And I just read in the Beach Boys fan club thing that it's coming out very shortly. Incredible.
I have a more general, not having to do with any one of these, 9,000 hit records. You know, we all know that there were all manner of really good drummers with good time, who could read, who could figure out what a producer wanted. How come you got to be the guy? What?
Well, I don't know. Perhaps some of it was just my getting along with everybody. I had a kind of a comical nature. I would do jokes. I kept the guys at ease, I think. Rarely did we do sessions without passing some jokes around. The guys, not only me, guys came up with jokes. Producers loved to laugh. And if everybody was loose. You see, when we made records in those days, gentlemen, we made them not to be so intricate and perfect that they were absolutely perfect. We made them to feel good. All the records that were hits, if you listen to all those records,
Yeah.
they all felt good. And once they felt good, that was the take. If they felt good, little glitches, little mistakes didn't mean anything. They could be fixed.
Yeah.
On the Do Run Run, you were on that one?
Yes.
So that's just this crazy drum thing. I mean, was that one of your many patterns that ended up in that one, or is that like one
I don't-
outburst that came out?
I just don't know how to tell you that, but some of it was the lunacy of me just absolutely going crazy,
I think some
Phil
of it too
used to
was.
Phil would turn me loose. It was that simple.
I think some of it too was having to have the drum beat heard over 20 guys playing through the wall of reverb.
Well, that's another thing. The wall of sound was, generally when you did records, it was a rhythm section, a piano, bass, drums, and guitar.
Yeah.
Phil Spector came along. He had 4 basses sometimes, 4 guitars, 5 guitars, 6, sometimes 7 guitars, 4 pianos, 1 drummer only. Thank goodness I didn't have to worry about, mixing it up with anybody. All the percussionists. Sonny Bono, I used to throw him a tambourine or a cowbell. Sonny Bono was considered a musician. He was one of the guys that hung around. He hung around the sessions, and all of a sudden he started dating Cher. Cher was a background singer, but I used to make up these contracts with Salvatore Bono, and just it was Phil Spector's way of throwing the guy a bone, so to speak. And all of these people playing percussion. And Phil, there was always a sign on the door. It said, "Closed session." And anyone that stuck their head in, Phil would grab them and drag them in and say, "Hal, give him a tambourine, give him a..." Everybody was playing percussion. Absolutely amazing. All of those
So a
people.
lot of the famous drum parts.
Plus, all the strings
Yeah.
that would overdub and overdub, plus the horns and the saxes. Steve Douglas doing those great chicken solos. And
Well, that's what I'm saying though. On something like "To Do Run Run," you couldn't just play the hi-hat and the snare and expect to be heard. It wouldn't cut with
Well, you
30
see,
guys going on around.
I never
it.
worked that way with Phil anyway. I had a particular way that I played drums for Phil, and it was the same way that I played for the Beach Boys.
The snare and the tom on 2 and 4.
Exactly. Rarely used hi-hats and cymbals.
Yeah.
One of those things.
If you've got that audio tape, can we play another 30, 45 seconds of the thing we played on the way in? Just cut back in where we left off, and we'll know it when you start playing it. We just want to talk about some of these records, maybe. Oh, that's the beginning again. Well, anyways, there's Be My Baby.
Well, we got to listen to "Be My
Can't
Baby"
really hear
again.
that,
As long as they could
Can
hear
we
it,
hear
as long
one?
as they could hear it at
Oh,
home, it'll be
okay.
all right.
How do we know they're listening at home?
The day after this runs, I get 5 calls on my machine.
The Duran Run is on there. You know, all those songs we were talking about.
And Jen and Dean also. Jane and the Americans? I always thought that was East Coast, New York side. Was Jane and the Americans in New York?
No idea.
Wow. This is
Wow.
true. Wow.
That I didn't know.
Huh.
So you're playing on
Me and the
record.
Kings.
Okay, you could kill it for a little while. The show's
And-
only a
and
half hour
remember,
long.
See, everybody talks about "Be My Baby" as the great drum lick opening. See, for me, well, I like that. I mean, but he's a rebel. The opening thing to that's always just that, you know, that whole thing has always killed me.
Were
I
any,
mean,
Phil,
it scared
I
me.
have to hear it.
It
I
scared
can't
me.
remember.
Yeah, I mean, it scared me.
were any Phil sessions in New York for you? I know he had a few, but were you on
Not
any
that
of
I
those?
was on,
you
no.
weren't.
My only work in New York was Simon and Garfunkel when I would go back and do their sessions.
So when you played with Burt Bacharach, that was out here.
I was out here.
And Simon and Garfunkel, you were on many of the records, or all of them, or
Simon and Garfunkel, during their heyday, I guess I did just about all the records, up through and including Bridge Over Troubled Water, which ends that particular tape that you're listening to, one of the great records.
Was one thing I always wondered, what was the hardest thing you were ever given to play?
The hardest thing I ever looked at was happened to be Burt Bacharach.
Oh, What the World Needs Now.
Yeah, I took one look at that part and I said, there's no way that I could play it. And I went in to Burt and I told him, and I said, this bridge that you wrote in 3/4 is really, really, I said, I could never play it in a million years.
Was
I mean,
it all
just
30-second note?
exactly
Buzz roll through?
64th notes, it just never stopped. Or 128 notes, I don't know what they were. And he just said, oh, do what you want to do, Hal. It was just one of those thoughts, you know. And we messed around, rehearsed. But for the take, and this was with brushes, and now it sticks where you can bounce. So I thought I would try it, and we got through it. It came out perfect, and that was the take, and they loved it. So it was, Lord, we don't need another mountain. I mean, you know the song goes on and on
okay.
and on. It was just one of those things where somehow I held myself. No drugs, nothing, no booze. Somehow I did it with brushes.
By the way, you're talking about the Jackie DeShannon or Burt Bacharach?
The Burt Bacharach version.
Bacharach, yeah.
For the A&M record of it.
That's the house, the one with "House Is Not a Home" on it.
Yeah, because the New York record of it is Gary Chester playing. And you can definitely tell Gary Chester because he throws in every bell and whistle.
I never knew Gary.
Yeah. The other thing I always wondered is, who did you never work with that you wanted to work with? Was there some producer that...
Oh, there were a lot of people. There were lots of people that I would have liked to work with. There were New York people. I couldn't tell you right offhand. We don't have the time for me to sit here and start thinking.
You were on a lot of Sinatra sessions too, right?
Did Sinatra's only gold, Strangers in the Night, was his only true gold single. Did a lot of records with Frank from the time. You see, when I was working with Tommy Sands, and Nancy was with us all the time, and I was kind of a chaperone for Tommy and Nancy, and Big Nancy Sinatra, Frank's former wife, Nancy, and we traveled all over the country together. Naturally, I sort of became a part of that family, you know. So it's long stories of how I met Frank Sinatra. It's in the book, actually, how I met Frank Sinatra on the telephone.
Das Book.
Met Frank on the telephone calling from Germany the night that I met him. And it's just a long story. And the very first session that I ever did with him was a record called Come Softly to Me, I believe was the name of it. Beautiful song.
Now, is it true that you wore tuxedos?
No.
I heard that the first time everybody
No,
wore tuxedos.
Never.
Is it true that Glenn Campbell actually used a capo to play on Strangers in the Night?
I have no idea if Glenn did or not. I don't even know if Glenn was on the session.
He was on the session.
Ah. I know that we kind of caught Glenn. This was before Glenn became a big star. When we were doing a Dean Martin session, and we all did all of Dean Martin's records. And we were driving home that night. It was about 2 in the morning, and I was switching stations. I heard Glenn's voice, and he was doing in those days, KLAC, I think, was the country station. Yeah. He was doing an interview with a country guy, and he was saying, yeah, I just finished a session with Dean. You know, me and Dean, we're out there playing golf all the time. And I mean, he really came off like he was very tight with Dean. He didn't know Dean Martin any more than anyone did. So the next morning, we're all in a session. I said, hey, Glenn, when are you and Dean going out? He said, did you hear that? Who heard that? Nobody heard that. Everybody heard it.
Hey, lest we besmirch Sonny Bono's musicianship, you're actually playing on a Sonny Bono composition here.
Well, he actually played on the first.
I did a lot of Sonny and Cher's stuff.
You know, I Got You, Babe, right?
Yeah.
It's Needles and Pins.
But you were also on Glenn Campbell's first single on Capitol.
I have no idea.
Guess I'm dumb. It's a Pet Sounds outtake.
I have no idea. We got it. There
but
were a
wait.
lot of Glenn Campbell stuff.
So were you on the original Needles and, you know, Jackie DeShannon's Needles and Pins?
You know, I don't know if
yes, it says.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So we are on every time. Maybe I don't see every time that you walk in the room on here though. So.
No, that was cut in England.
Oh, really?
Because that's Jimmy Page on guitar.
Okay.
Otherwise, a very good record.
Hey,
So-
you were, but when I would hear, see, I didn't know who you were when I was a kid, you know, listening to these things, but you were one of my inspirations for taking up the drums.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, I heard that and I said, wow.
But
I
didn't you get any Spectre records? Didn't you read the notes on the back? Because I know.
No, not on the singles. Not on the singles.
But in the
You
album.
know, I didn't buy albums.
No.
Singles were too little for any credits, solo credits.
But
Yeah, except for the engineer and the producer.
Yeah, I guess.
but
Because the first one was a Christmas.
first
thing.
one with credits.
Yeah, they had credits. And, you know.
I know. So then you were part and parcel of most Beach Boy records, most Jan and Dean records, Paul
Birds.
Revere and the Raiders,
The Birds.
Carpenters.
Oh, it just goes
Goodbye to
on.
Love, was he on?
Monkeys.
Monkeys.
The Modern Drummer did an article
Wait a
on
minute,
me.
the Monkeys didn't play all their own instruments?
Modern Drummer did an article on me some time ago, and they researched 175 groups and singers that I replaced. Drummers on groups and singers that normally, like Frank Sinatra, you know, we always had Irv Cutler playing drums. I was one of the few people to come along and you know, play for Sinatra or Dean Martin and people like that.
Am I correct to say that in that formative period, 55 to 65, let's say that the other drummer was Earl Palmer? I
Absolutely.
mean, as opposed to 3 or 4 others, there was just.
You know, I
the two of
started
you.
to say before, you mentioned Jan and Dean. Earl and I always did Jan and Dean together. We played double drums. We had identical kits. We made our drum parts exactly the same.
So you wrote out the fills and everything?
We wrote out every note that we played. And we played together, except for the live performances that I did with them. And then we did the great pilot that, unfortunately, and Jan had his accent. But we were all signed to 20th Century Fox as actors. And I had worked as an actor at Paramount, at Disney.
What movie might we see you in?
Well, Babes in Toyland at Disney.
And you know who's starring in that?
Tommy Sands.
Tommy
Tommy
Sands.
Sands and
Yeah,
Annette, who was a sweetheart.
Is this
And
kind of
I-
a Red West kind of role?
And
or
I got
was this-
to no. Don't knock Red.
No, I think it's fine. I'm just. You know.
I worked. They were just strictly bit parts, just walk-ons, walk-offs. I got very tight with Ray Bolger, who was a terrific man. He was a wonderful man, and he loved to fool around with drumsticks. You know, he'd tap dance, and I'd tap dance.
Skip was hipping me to a lot of current stuff about you, especially the klezmer scene or things like that.
Well, the klezmer is just part of it. I just finished an album with Lauren Hart, wonderful album, with Mark Wilson from Phoenix, terrific guy. This new group, Pink Noise Test, did that. The Victor DiLorenzo new single that Herb Alpert signed him to. He
Victor
was-
DiLorenzo from the Violent
yeah,
Femmes?
from the Violent
Wow.
Femmes. And the David Grisman stuff is just fantastic.
What Grisman is doing.
David Grisman is doing klezmer, and we're doing these shows, and we've been doing these shows all over the country.
Did you ever see Mickey Katz?
I never did. No, I never did.
Art did.
I
I
went
may
to.
have seen him on television, maybe in the real early days.
I mean, not that he's the only klezmer guy, but he's
Yeah.
the most widely heard one, I guess.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I went to Hanukkah in Santa Monica in '79.
Uh-huh.
He had a show there with the Berry sisters. And,
Uh-huh.
Wait a minute, the Barry sisters are on that?
I think so. Don't. That might be. I'm trying to really overdo it by not name dropping now. So maybe I'll just stop with Mickey Katz. But so you're with Grisbin Touring and just getting into this new area, which you've never done before.
We
right?
did this album is called Songs of Our Fathers, magnificent album. And it's done so well that we all of a sudden we started playing all of these synagogues and temples and Jewish community centers have wanted us to come play this album. So we've been playing the album. Meanwhile, he's been getting me out to do some old Jewish comedy. You know, I have so many old, wonderful old stories. So I've been doing these stories, and they've been eating it up. Tomorrow I'm going to San Francisco, and I'm doing a comedy album.
Are you seated? Do you do your own rim shots then?
No. We will do. You know, I did a Beatles album that the Beatles interviews that I put all the percussion on. And that's what he wants me to do,
Wait,
that
that-
type of thing.
I mean something recently.
No,
Not
this
Ed
is,
No,
Rudy?
no. Remember
This
what those
is in the
things probably
60s.
came out in '64. The interviews with the Beatles.
Don't recall the percussion on. I'm
the
sorry.
Beatles interviews, yeah.
Oh yeah, that drum roll on when John talked.
Arthur.
Well, I never
A
worked with the Beatles as the Beatles, but I did work with the Beatles individually.
What George Harrison's
That's
were you
something
on?
else. I wasn't on, I just did the stuff that George produced when we worked together. Ringo hired me to do his vocal album.
The Sentimental Journey record.
I have no idea.
And Paul?
I did
And John, you're on the rock and roll
the
album.
rock and roll album with John. Paul's the only one I did not physically work with, but he overdubbed on stuff that I did, and I overdubbed on stuff that he did.
Well, we're going to continue this. There's a
Kinda
part. There's a
did
part
it.
2 to this that will be coming up, and these two fellows will
You
disappear.
got to play some more of that album.
Couple
I
of-
mean, that montage.
I hope it's in the middle of the tape, and we can just go out on the rest of that montage of great Hal Blaine drum
Because you'll
parts.
hear some of the stuff you mentioned.
So thanks a lot. I'm Art Fein, Hal Blaine. Thanks for being here. We're going to do another one.
Thanks, Art.
Next week.
Thank you.
Next week.
We'll see you soon. See you guys later. Maybe we're not in the middle of the tape. Maybe we're at the beginning again, but I'm sure there.
Everybody loves somebody.
Celia, you're breaking my heart. Hold me. When the moon is in the silver arms, hey, Mr. Gentleman. They say we're young and we don't know. This diamond ring doesn't shine for me anymore. You're the one that I love. Another Saturday night.
But I can't help.
He's a rebel and you'll never be any good. She's a fool. Two girls for every boy.
Well, there are two different J's.
We
only knew the one.
Hi, Art Fein. Art
I
Fein's
have
Poker
no
Party,
idea.
coming to you, or Drum Party tonight, coming to you from Hollywood. Part 2 with Hal Blaine. What are all those songs you heard on the intro have in common? Hal Blaine's drumming, as well as on another 3,500 or 4,000 great records that were made all around the United States. You didn't really drum outside of the States on records, did you? Did you go to England at all?
Yes, I went to England many times. I went over there to do MacArthur Park, but we came back here and did it here.
Oh. Huh?
So we
Okay.
didn't actually record there. But we've done television shows. We've done albums over there with John Denver, all the years with John Denver. Recorded in the Far East, recorded in Australia.
Okay, well, we didn't really start the show formally. Let's say hello to Todd Everett. Hello, Todd Everett.
Hello.
Hi, Todd.
Nice to see you here.
Oh, hi.
Speaking of 4,000 records, I think this is his 4,000th appearance on this show. Nice to see you once again.
Pleased.
Hal never played on any of your records, did he?
Unfortunately not.
Next to him, Doug Fieger. Welcome.
pleasure to be here.
He
An
has,
honor to
he
be
has
here.
records too, but none with Hal on them. But who knows? Someday.
Love it.
Well, they've had hit records. The Knack is a giant group, you know.
They had a pretty good drummer too. Still do.
Pretty good drummer.
Yeah.
And he's a big fan, as you know. He's
Yeah,
a big,
nice
big fan.
guy.
Well, you guys, we in the first show we did last week. you
We're
were
sorry we missed that, so we didn't hear any of the questions, so excuse
We're
us
gonna
if we
repeat
ask the
them.
same
all the same ones.
Sure, no problem.
I'm making an analogy that that Hal had talked about being held back by Phil Spector until the right moment. Now, you guys have been in the bullpen waiting, striving to ask questions and talk to Hal as you heard him answer all the questions for a show. So you chime right in.
Last week you explained how you sort of got started in rock and roll by playing with Tommy Sands. How did that trail end up with your playing with everybody? I mean, I can't imagine, maybe it's true, but I can't imagine somebody saying, gee, the drummer on that Tommy Sands record is real good. Who is he? Let's get him.
Well, some of it started because we were recording at Capitol, and Dave Cavanaugh, and Ken Nelson, and Cliffy Stone, and all of those producers that were at Capitol heard me playing this new supposed rock and roll.
Nick Finney.
Whatever it was, Nick Finney.
Wait a minute. Were you on any Stan Freberg records?
No.
I thought maybe you were the drummer on the Great Pretender.
No,
or
but
something.
Cliffy Stone is the guy that, was producing all that stuff and actually wrote John and Marcia with Stan.
Is that right?
Now, that's quite a hit, and of course he was managing and producing Tennessee Ernie Ford and so many people. And I mention that because I have breakfast quite often with Cliffy now.
Is that right?
We're neighbors out there, and he's just a wonderful man. And he's
Well, we're great fans of his. Please tell him
Yeah.
about the show. We'd like to get him out.
sure.
So you started doing a lot of Capitol sessions, and
I
then
started
that led to other.
I started working at Capitol with H.B. Barnum,
Okay.
who was quite an arranger,
Sure.
And H.B. got me with Sam Cooke and with just a number of people out there that were doing. I mean, to me, rock and roll was blues. It was just blues. That's all there was to it. But they called it rock and roll, but it led to the surf music, which instead of a single afterbeat was a double afterbeat. Instead of bop bop, it became bop 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 bop. That was the surf beat.
That's all there is to it.
That's all there was to it. And we used to do, when we worked for Joe Saraceno,
Which is the Marquettes and
right, our little wrecking
T-Bones
crew.
and all those guys.
So are you saying that the Marquettes and the T-Bones were all
Studio bands.
studio guys and you were the drummer
All
on
the same
whatever
guys.
shape your
Tommy
stomach's in?
Tedesco, Carol Kay, the one female in our group,
Louis Shelton.
Ray Pullman. I don't know if Louis was there that early.
Bill Pittman in there.
Louis came later. Bill Pittman, who we call King Salt. Lyle Ritz,
Bass player.
Tedesco.
wonderful bass player. Yeah, I mentioned Tommy Tedesco, probably the greatest guitar player in the world. I don't know.
Wait a second. If you did Out of Limits by the Marquettes, were you also on the Ventures Out of
Yes,
Limits?
we did a lot of the Ventures records.
Were you on Out of Limits by the Ventures? No, by then they were. You
Well,
were
if
on
it's
some
in
Ventures
there,
records.
you'd have to-
I'll take,
we'd
I'll
have to
take a look.
check it out.
It's like a phone book. Though. I'll never
We'll,
read
we'll
through it.
carry on Hall
The
Art
reason
reads.
we were on
No, it's like a Manhattan phone book. There are volumes.
Uh-huh.
This
The
is only
reason-
the one
The
volume.
reason we were doing Ventures records was because they were on the road making the big bucks all the time. We were in the studio making the records.
Same with the Beach Boys.
There are pictures
Same
in
way
there
with,
of me
Paul
with the
Revere.
Ventures.
Right, Paul Revere and the Raiders.
You
Oh,
know,
speaking
working
of your
live
book,
with the Ventures.
You have a book out, Hal Blaine and the Wrecking Crew. Mighty fine story of your life and your career. And this has been. I remember there was a big debut party for it some years ago, but I
At the
wasn't.
Big
I wasn't there.
Potato in
I wasn't
Hollywood.
there.
And everybody came.
Well, there's a 800 number after the show that people can give you a call, see what learn about this. This came out in '90, and it's got some great
What is it?
some,
Out of Limits?
Out of Limits.
some great some
Look
great
that up.
shots from that.
I have my glasses.
One other follow-up from last week's show, and then we can get into sort of all
Sure.
new stuff. But you were talking about how you had been a jazz drummer.
Or Outer? Is it Outer?
It's
or
Out of-
It was called Out of Limits. He
was
did
different
Ringo. I
depending on
can't
the
with
artist.
Lauren Green.
Wow.
He did Ringo.
Anyway, excuse me.
Sorry, sorry, Todd.
Just jump in when you
So,
can.
so you were a jazz player who didn't like rock and roll initially.
Well, it wasn't that
What
that's
kind of
not-
jazz were you playing and with who? And why did you finally turn around and like rock and roll?
Todd, the thing was, I had been, all of us that got into the studios, fortunately, except for three of us, I was a very learned musician. I spent 3 years. I got my degree in music. I minored in piano and voice. I danced. To us, a lot of us, rock and roll sounded so juvenile, so infantile, that it was one of those things where we thought, this isn't really music. You know, music to us was Miles Davis. I mean, the people of the day, Dizzy Gillespie, all of the records, the bebop records that we listened to, and all the jazz, wonderful jazz records. Buddy Rich, of course, who was a dear friend. I could tell you stories
I'm
about
dazzled,
Buddy
by
Rich.
the way, at how many rock and roll drummers I've talked to over the years who invariably mention Buddy Rich as being their
Well,
idol.
Buddy was the guy that had hands that were unbelievable. He could just go brrr, you know, for hours and think nothing of it.
So what turned you around? Why, other than the paycheck, what did you find appealing about rock
There's
and roll?
no other than.
Okay, fair enough.
I went from a nightclub musician making $125 a week, if I was lucky, to all of a sudden we were making $1,000 a week, to $3,000 a week, to $7,500 a week.
Nice
And this is when
incentive.
this was real money too. This is back in the
Absolutely.
60s. Yeah.
All of a sudden, we were making, you know, a couple $100,000 a year. It was unheard of. We were not CEOs. You know, we didn't head corporations or anything. And of course, divorce took it all away. But that's the way it goes, you know. I'm very happy that at my age now, I've done it all, I've seen it all. I've done everything I really wanted to do, and I know that one of these days I'm going to just say, I'm retiring, and that this is really the end.
But you've tried that before.
I sound like George Foreman, you know,
Right.
who just won again. And I'm a big fan of George's, but I really feel like it's time for me to, you know, there's a lot of wonderful young talent out there, and it's time for them to move in, just the way we moved in, you know, 1957.
From what you've seen of the local session scene, has there been a crest to the drum machine situation, or is it
Well, I'll tell
still
you.
blocking things up pretty well?
I'll tell you what happened. Toward the beginning of the 80s, I guess, or maybe the mid-80s, all the machines came in. And everybody was using, you know, because it's all economics. I mean, sessions got so expensive. It used to be, we were earning, you know, $65 for 3 hours. Today, it's almost $500 for 3 hours for a sideman.
Per man.
And, you know, it's awful lot of money. Studio costs are unbelievable. So guys have gone to the machines. All the keyboard players were playing drums on their keyboards and in their computers.
Have you ever played along with? Have you ever done sessions
Yes,
along with?
yes. Well, one of the things, Herb Alpert recently got me on two things that were all electronic, and he decided, let's put some live drums on with the all electronic stuff. And that was the Angel Corpus Christi stuff out of San Francisco, very fine singer, and Victor Di Lorenzo, the kid from the Violent Femmes. Doesn't bother me. I'll play, you know, anything, anywhere. And also some of this pink noise test that I did with these kids out in Redondo.
Have you been sampled? Do you have drum discs or anything?
I don't, but I know that I've been sampled all over the
Right.
world. A lot of people, they used to advertise in magazines, you know, we have Hal Blaine on. You know, if we have
So
him-
you didn't actually, because a lot of the drummers will go
I
and
never
produce
did
their
it.
own.
I never did any of that. I
discs
never
and
did
stuff.
any albums. I never did anything like that. I never did videos. I did do albums. I mean, as an artist, I had one album that's really a very rare animal today, and it was called Have Fun, Play Drums, and it was a booklet on how to hold your sticks and just having fun playing drums with nothing heavy. And my understanding from collectors today, that album goes for $1,500.
Oh, wow.
It was a $3 album in those days.
If you could get it and learn to play drums like you, it's probably a fairly good investment.
Well, I'll tell you,
Cheap at twice the price, exactly.
had I known at the time, and we all say these things in retrospect, I would have had, you know,
A lot of them in selling
several
them out,
hundred
right.
somewhere in the back room.
Jump right
Well,
in.
when
I'm
I
just-
when I
I'm
asked you about
enjoying
the prevalence of the drum machines, I mean, I know that drummers were flying out of work in the mid-'80s. Is there, if people are calling
coming
you,
back.
It's coming back. Live drums are coming back.
Drums are coming back. I started mentioning before I got off track, I'm sorry. It seems that drums are now being put on a lot of the electronic orchestras. The electronic, all the strings that you hear. All the television, I have friends, they're doing major television shows. They get $300 for an entire show. $300 and they do an entire, and I won't mention the name of the shows because they're non-union. But generally those shows were probably spending $15,000 to $25,000 a week on those weekly shows with live musicians.
Right.
Excuse me.
Well, so like the group you mentioned, Pink Noise Test just now, so they're a younger band, and they wanted, and this is not in addition to a drum machine, they wanted a drummer.
They wanted to put drums on stuff that they had.
But they had the
wanted
drum
me to
machine already,
overdub.
but it was over a drum
It was
machine.
all, no, in that case, some of it was electronics, but in that case, they had a drummer. They wanted me replacing what the drummer had done.
I see.
Which you did a
That was
lot
very fun.
in the 60s as well. You would come in and sit in with a band.
Yeah, except that I wasn't replacing what the drummer had already done.
No, you were,
I would just come in and
right.
But while
Right.
Dennis Wilson was ostensibly the drummer for the Beach Boys, you were the guy on the records.
Exactly, exactly. Dennis was a dear friend. People ask me about that. The proof of the pudding is when Dennis did his own album, he hired me to do it.
And it was a real good
And he
album,
would,
too,
when he
the
would go,
Dennis Wilson
when he would
album.
go out and play live, he'd copy your parts and stuff.
Well, whatever.
To-
He did
to
his
make
thing.
the-
He was the consummate,
Right.
perfect Beach Boy on stage. He shook his head and the girls went crazy. They loved him.
You might not have had the same effect.
Well,
Oh, that was a few years ago, and with the striped shirt.
well, like I said, during the afternoon I was making $60. That night he was making 60,000.
In the rock era that you were so much a part of in the sessions, was there anybody that just stuck out, a Ringo kind of person that you said, that's interesting out of the rock and roll field? I mean, it would be such an
Well,
aficionado.
I was a big fan of Paul McCartney's.
Drumming?
Oh, no, you're talking about drummers.
Yeah. Because
Although
we
he is
had
a drummer. Paul McCartney actually does play drums.
Because Doug and I did half a show talking about Stevie Wonder's drumming that he does live.
Well, I did a lot of, when I did the John Lennon album, John and I had a lot of nice long talks, especially about Pet Sounds. I mean, he was a big Beach Boy fan. And he was another guy that I really admired, obviously, and it was fun that I got to hang out with him. Charlie Watts, the Stones, came to my house at one time, and we hung out, and it was fun hanging with Charlie. They had never seen electric garage door openers. This is before the Genie opener. And I picked them up after the concert. They jumped in that Cadillac that I had, and we flew up into the Hollywood Hills. And in order to get into my house, my garage, came up outpost, make a U-turn right in the garage. Well, the hundreds of cars chasing us. Well, this is before the Genie garage door opener. It was RCA, had a radio control General Motors thing. And as I would approach the house, I would hit the button, the garage door would be open, and I go right in, I hit the button and it closed, and all those cars went right up to Mulholland.
I'm sorry, you were with Charlie Watts, and the fans knew
Stones,
this? And the
yeah.
fans somehow knew this?
All the Stones were in the car. And when this happened, Charlie said, "How in the world did that happen?" And I said, "Well, Charlie, my garage knows my car." And he couldn't get over it. And of course, then I showed him.
That's great.
Well, he sat in the car for half an hour.
Easily amused.
And I remember, never forget that
Oh, God.
that Mick said, "Well, I reckon we could have something like that in London," or where they were from. I don't remember.
They're on the other side of the road, they would probably.
But on occasion I've run into Charlie, and Charlie's another guy. He had big bands. He loved big bands. I've seen him in some movies with big bands. Scores.
He just
that
put out an album, as a matter of fact, this last year.
Big band?
It wasn't a big band, it was sort of a small bebop. It was a
like a
tribute to
concert.
Charlie Parker. Bit
Well,
that he did.
most of the drummers, I mean, I liked all the drummers. I recently got to meet Steve Gadd. We had a bunch of pictures taken together
He always
at the NAMM show.
reminded me of his style, kind of reminded me
Gadd
of
of,
your. Steve Gadd
Stuff,
played on
New York
on-
session drummer.
and Paul Simon stuff
fine,
after
sure.
Simon and Garfunkel. He became basically Paul, like 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover, stuff like that.
Yeah,
The real
nice
inventive
guy, man.
stuff, but very similar in ways to things that you did, very revolutionary kind of ideas for pop songs,
Sure, sure.
where the drum was the actual hook of the song.
Sure, but
Yeah.
in conclusion, I like all drummers.
What about records with drum solos? I mean, we know about the kind of a overwhelming, weighty thing in the 70s of Led Zeppelin kind of bands indulging in 20-minute drum solos. Are there places where you've seen drum solos that you like? I mean, or are there like Olatunji records that you like, or are there places where you would like to just hear the drums
Well, I'll tell you,
isolated from the actual background?
I had the house band for the very first pop concert, and that was the Monterey Pop Festival, with all of those acts. Keith Moon was on the, was with the Who. I don't know who. You know who? Anyway, and he's doing these incredible solos, and he used to do interviews and say, "When I grow up, I want to be like Hal Blaine." I mean, to me, it was hysterical. But here was a guy, very fine. Today, I would say if I had to pick one, well, there's two drummers, I guess. Anton Fig, who does the
Letterman show.
Letterman show, and Simon Phillips,
Really?
the
English
drummer,
guy from
English
Genesis.
drummer. He's one of these incredible people that just
Yeah, he's really good.
has four
Anton-
things going at once.
I don't know that he does it anymore, but Anton Fig used to tour with Booker T and the MGs, playing the Al Jackson parts, or playing his, which is pretty nice.
Well, I was
recommendation.
working with Booker T up in the San Francisco area. Nice guy.
And you were living
I
in
mean, when
really
you were
fun.
living up there recently.
No, I wasn't living up there. No, it was just some other work that happened. And it started when Steve Douglas passed away.
Oh,
We did a big memorial for him one night.
A
with
lot
a
of-
bunch of people.
A lot of people tend to get typecast, but here you're doing all this real bombastic stuff,
I'm
say on
so
the Spectre
fortunate.
records, and then you do Close to You and Carpenter stuff, which is as unlike
I am
Hal Blaine
so-
things as
I'm
anybody
so
else.
lucky that I was close to Joe Osborne, one of the great bass players
Yeah.
of the world. And he and I and Larry Knechtel were doing all that stuff for Lou Adler, for Johnny Rivers. It just goes on and on and on. And we could play ballads, or we could play just as hard as we wanted to play.
Did you ever play with Zappa? Did you ever
Never
do any
did,
sessions
never
with
did.
Zappa? Because Joe Osborne did.
I think Joe mentioned that, excuse me.
Just
I
wondering.
think Joe mentioned that, yeah.
Zappa used a lot of LA session
Uh-huh.
people, and I just.
Mr. Director, while Todd's thinking of a question, could we maybe cue that tape up to the middle again that we listened to the Hal Blaine song excerpts?
Joe was like Glenn
And-
Campbell and Burton. They didn't read any music.
Just could play
They
anything.
just play these things off the wall. They would look at Glenn and say, no, they do the incredible solos. And they'd say, okay, stop.
First record I ever bought,
Uh-huh.
Return to Sender.
Oh,
First record I ever bought when I was a kid.
I actually was in the movie with Elvis doing that.
Good,
Yeah.
So
now,
what-
did you
Yeah,
play on
okay.
Goodbye Cruel World, James Darren? Did you play on that record
I
by
have
any
no
chance?
idea. That's
Second
Because
record
that
you
would be
bought?
the second record I ever bought.
What
that
else
was
record-
my
what else-
first record of the year, Taste of Honey.
Taste Honey?
I had 8 of them. 7 in
And
a
again,
row.
a drum-driven record. The drum is
Oh, there's a
hook
wonderful
of it.
story about that.
Okay,
I'll
let's
tell you.
Let's hear the story about that one. Thank
If
you.
you wanna
Let's,
hear
let's
that.
save it right there so we can pick it up again.
When
What record are
we
we talking about?
When we went in to
Taste
do
of Honey.
Taste of Honey, as you know, the song, the beginning of the da 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 da.
Was the Tijuana Brass a consistent band, or just whoever got together?
No,
the
same
session?
band.
Okay.
So the intro to the song, da 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 da, but nobody was coming in right.
Uh-huh.
Each time we were doing the take. So me and my comedic way, we were at Gold Star. We went da 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 da, and I went boom, 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 boom.
And that became an event, of course. And then everybody's on time. That's
And
great.
But that became a
The
hook
hit.
of
That's
that
the hook
Wow.
of the song. Exactly.
Wow.
And that was part of the way I worked. I was always looking for a hook somewhere.
Uh-huh.
You know that song Dizzy? Did it, digga 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 digga, did it, digga digga digga. So simple, but it was a hook.
Yeah.
Huh.
You know, it's the Sam Cooke thing. If you listen to Another Saturday Night, I was always coming up with a hook somehow.
Was Saturday Night the only Sam Cooke, or were you on Chain Gang and other ones like that? Or just
I don't
that
know.
one?
They sent me an album recently.
Look it up here.
They sent me an album, compliments of Abco or whoever it was,
Alan Klein.
and it was a Sam.
Alan Klein was his manager.
I have no idea. I have no idea.
And some of those great early Spectre records that
And the
didn't-
early records are not in there. A lot of the early stuff.
This is just TV. I noticed on the thing this is like TV stuff and
Oh no, that's in the back.
oh,
All the movies, television shows, and commercials.
Generally speaking, did you, on rock and roll records at least, did you get to do pretty much your own stuff? You're telling how you sort of improvise these.
Well, once people got to know my name and I was associated with a lot of hit records, then it was do your thing, make us a hit record, you know. And it was one of those, fortunately, I could do no wrong, that type of thing. And usually my you know, I listened to a song carefully and I would do my thing, and it generally was always the right thing. Generally, rarely did someone say, no, I don't think we want to do that. The only time that ever happened was I had heard a record from England, speaking of drummers, and they were doing it, and every once in a while I would hear that thing that we called squeeze box. The hi-hat would go, and I heard that. So I really liked that. So we were back here, and I was in doing some work with Lou Adler, and I was, whatever the record, when I tried it, and we finished rehearsing. Lou said, "Don't do that funny thing. It sounds like white noise or something." I said, "Okay, no problem." And then maybe another producer, or two or three, you know, I tried it out on them, and I really felt it. And they would say, "Hal, don't do that thing. We don't like that." I said, "Fine." Johnny Rivers came along.
I wanted to.
Poor Side of Town,
And that was it. Yeah.
and that was a #1 record.
Where's it coming? Where's the come in?
It's in there. You'll hear it in the record.
Okay, now I'll hear it.
And now every producer said, "Hey, and we do that thing that you."
But that was Lou
that
Adler,
thing."
wasn't it? Which is
I
funny.
don't know if
Ultimately,
that was
the Johnny
Lou
Rivers
on-
would have been Lou.
No, I
Those
think-
records that Johnny Rivers made that were supposedly live at the Whiskey A Go Go that weren't actually.
Oh
they-
no, we did a lot of whiskey stuff.
Was it actually recorded? I had heard that they
Oh,
created
yeah.
that in the studio and added.
Well, some of it maybe, like we did with the Beach Boys, but
Right, the Beach Boys part.
but I got this beautiful live album.
And that's
we did
really
up
live at the Whiskey.
at the Whiskey. Me and Joe and
Wow.
and Johnny. Yeah, it was
Wow,
the first
yeah.
time I had worked at the Whiskey.
Wow.
That's
yeah, that.
'Cause I had
and
always
you
thought
didn't
that-
go back into the studio and sweeten it then, that stuff?
Well, Johnny might have, done some
Right.
sweetening. I have no idea.
when
really
when
don't
you would
know.
replace a drummer. I wanted to ask you when you replace a drummer from a band who was in the band. For instance, Mr. Tambourine Man. That was just McGuinn and session guys. You and session guys.
And
What did the-
Hillman, Chris Hillman.
Oh, he actually played on it as well.
Yeah, I'm doing an album with Chris in about 10
He's one-
days.
he
Great.
does a
Yeah.
rose band.
What kind of an album?
I have no idea. Herb Peterson's producing.
Okay.
But would the other guys in the band resent you? I mean, would you ever?
Not at
like-
all. The only guy that ever resented me was that guy Clark, who was the drummer with the Birds, just because you bring up the Birds.
That's I was
Michael Clark.
Michael Clark.
Michael Clark. He's the only guy that was really TO'd or ticked off.
Did you replace him later on, or was that the only track?
No,
that
I
you did?
just, no. I've got all these outtakes.
You
of
did
the
all
stuff
the
we did.
all the other Birds
Turn,
songs.
turn,
All
and
right.
on and on and
You got
on.
all
And
these
they're not even listed
Right.
in my discography. They will be eventually. But all that stuff.
But all the other
Sessions.
drummers and stuff were happy to have you.
Absolutely, man. They would
That's so
say they
cool.
were learning from me.
That's so cool.
You know, they wanted to take the picture with me, whatever.
Well, when you just said you have outtakes, in other words, a session is usually kept by the producer. You have outtakes from a lot of good
Well,
records?
see, there's a lot of underground stuff out there that we don't know about.
Right.
And fans.
Oh, so you have
send
stuff
it.
they sent to you. I see.
Exactly.
Bruce Gary sent it too.
You got anything?
I mean it. I've got the outtakes, the Birds.
So
I had never heard it before. I've got some Beach Boys outtakes. There's a whole bunch.
Well, they're
of them.
doing a whole. Supposedly, it's been coming
Right,
for years.
right.
All of the Pet Sounds sessions.
Right. They're supposed to be out any day.
Okay, let's pick up the Hal Blaine soundtrack of samples that we have. Finish out the 4-minute sample made by your friend in Washington, D.C., the disc jockey,
Made by Goldie.
Goldie. And thank you, Goldie, and thank you, Hal Blaine.
Thank you very much, Art.
This is it?
And so we're listening in the background while it's going on.
Yeah.
So what do we got? We got Sonny and Cher. This has got a great
Well, it's Phil's, he was just
imitating Phil.
Sonny Bono was imitating Phil's style. But still great records. Those were great. Did you bang bang? Are you on that?
I have no idea.
It's that.
How much the Sonny and Cher stuff you worked on? How much of that was Sonny, and how much was Harold Batiste?
Well, I think Harold.
Exchanging glances.
What, Harold? We're still on.
Because some of that stuff
He
was
did
real
live
innovative,
shows.
real clever
He
stuff.
did live shows with Sonny and Cher at the Hollywood Bowl.
How early did you do Dean Martin stuff? What was the earliest like Dean Martin stuff that you did?
Now, we're going to sign off again. We did it once, but see you next time. Good night.
I don't think that I can take it, 'cause it took so long to bake it.
Here's to you, Mrs. Robinson. Round, round, get around.